p.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your ideas, bring your voice. King Arthur had nothing on us. Here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
Hi, everybody. It's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, the Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
The future is uncertain. I know this. Death is inevitable. I know this. But one thing is certain, as free men, it is our right to live unencumbered and in peace. And those times are quickly drawing to an end. And in these times, peace is certainly an illusion, and as the chains grow tighter, our ability to slip those chains increase incrementally with every passing moment. Inaction is no longer an option. It's time to raise our voices like a cacophony of thunder and lightning and tell the masters no more. And this is Nighthawk, and I say, for myself, no more. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, because the freedom is slipping away. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Truth Radio, this is episode 103. It's April 3rd, 2021. This is going to be a special broadcast. Guess what? Pastor James Coates is free from jail. I've done many broadcasts over the last several months talking about his unfair incarceration, getting thrown into jail for simply keeping church open. Anyways, we're going to be hearing an exclusive interview tonight from Pastor James Coates, where he is going to speak out on everything he experienced, where things are at now, and it was done by Danielle Smith at Western Standard. The link for the full interview is in the description, but let's get right to it, because I want to get to all the updates. I mentioned so many times everything that was going on with Pastor James, and this is his first interview speaking out about everything that took place. So let's get into it.
Let me just frame this out for you a little bit, because I think that Pastor James and I came to a lot of the same conclusions at the same time. And his way of demonstrating his resistance to government orders came, as you saw. My way of demonstrating my resistance came from me leaving media. And I had announced in January I was leaving media, a lot because I felt that there was suppression of information. I was very frustrated by that. It's part of the reason we've done this Uncensored series. But there really was a last straw. And you'll recall what happened in that final week that I was on the air. February 14th was the date of Pastor James's final sermon before turning himself into the RCMP, which I believe he did on February the 17th. And it was February the 19th that I had the premier on the show saying, what in the world are you doing? And faced off an awful lot of resistance to releasing the pastor. And so I've been watching his case for some time. I had a regular listener, Angela, who's a parishioner of Pastor James, goes to that church. So she was telling me what was going on in the lead up to it, and I could barely believe it. I think the world could barely believe it. And to have hardened criminals released from remand because they were facing COVID overcrowding, and to have Pastor James stay incarcerated was baffling. So we were fortunate to watch that he did get released last week. We're going to find out about that. But and we're also going to talk a little more about religious freedom. I mean, I've always been a big supporter of religious freedom, as you know. But what does religious freedom actually mean? Is it religious freedom to do what the government tells you to do, or is it something more than that? So we're going to talk about that tonight. So without further ado, let me introduce Pastor James Coates. Pastor James, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
I want to go back to that. I'm going to have to deal with it in chunks because I think people are really interested in knowing if you're okay after the experience of 5 weeks in remand. And so let's begin where I just left off there with what happened on February the 17th, because I gather that you weren't expecting that they were going to detain you. So tell us how that all went down.
Well, it was the 16th, as I recall, and that was a Tuesday, and I went to the RCMP office, turned myself in, was told that, I mean, ultimately the call would be in the hands of the justice of the peace, and so I was told that, I mean, they can't be too specific, but it was implied that I'd probably be able to go home that day. Obviously, I'm not putting a lot of stock in that because I do understand that it's the justice of the peace is going to decide. But I was there. I was in a cell. I spent the day in a cell and was brought before a justice of the peace for a second time because the first time was adjourned. Later in the afternoon or evening, I'd lost track of time by that point, and there was the record of our non-compliance with regard to the health orders that was brought before the justice of the peace, and he made his decision, put together the paperwork, sent it to the RCMP. I didn't know for sure what I was going to be faced with at that point in time, but my lawyers had been good in terms of priming my pump and having me aware of what could be. I knew that I wouldn't be able to agree to a condition, and the way that the paperwork came to me, it was either agree or you can't be released. And so at that point in time, I had to indicate that I couldn't agree to that condition. By agreeing to that condition, I was essentially bowing the knee to Caesar. I'd be saying that Jesus Christ isn't the head of his church. I would be giving up my call as a pastor to shepherd the flock. And so I could not do that. And that meant that I was going to be held in custody.
So let me just make sure I understand what that condition was, because if I understand it, they wanted you to agree that you were going to go away and follow all of the health orders. Otherwise, you wouldn't preach. Am I summarizing that right? Is that what they were asking you to sign as an undertaking?
Yeah, everything has always been about compliance. So AHS or the RCMP, and in this case, the Justice of the Peace, have been trying to get us to comply with the health orders. And to do that would fundamentally alter the way that we gather and would prevent us from allowing the Word of God to shape and determine how we gather as a local church. And so the condition simply precluded me from stepping foot on our property unless we were in full compliance with the public health orders. Now, that's incredibly difficult because I'm a pastor of a congregation of a few hundred people. And so part of the the compliance component doesn't even have anything to do with me. I can't guarantee that everyone's going to be 6 feet apart the entire time they're together, and I'm certainly not going to force people to wear masks against their own will and conscience. So, I mean, even what they're requiring me to do goes well beyond what I humanly could anyway. And so I knew I couldn't agree to that. I wasn't going to force people to wear masks. I wasn't going to micromanage behavior and say you had to be 6 feet apart. And so I knew that I couldn't fulfill that condition.
Well, this is the thing that's surprising to me, because there are many people who aren't following many different parts of the health orders, but they're not getting incarcerated. There's lots of people who are taking a fine and then going and fighting the fine. And it seems like overkill that they decided to incarcerate you rather than just give you a fine. Did they explain why they took that route?
Well, I think there were just many attempts to try and utilize tools that would compel us to comply, because that's what AHS is after. They're after compliance. And given the fact that we had stood as tall as we did, the sermon that I preached on December 20th certainly drew attention. We had plenty of complaints coming in from the community around us. And then even our public statement upped the ante as well, I'm sure, because we began to address the narrative that we're unloving to our community, that we're not thinking about our neighbors, that we're being selfish and self-centered in what we're doing. And so I just think we stood the tallest, and they employed the tools that were available to them to get us to comply. The last one was the undertaking, and I think that was an ill-advised tool that they utilized against me. And not only did it require me to go to jail for 5 weeks, I believe it backfired significantly.
Oh, I think you're totally right. Now, I thought the sermon that got you in trouble was February 14th. You told me earlier it was December 20th. So I listened to that before our interview today. So I do want to talk to you about the content of both of those and why you came to the conclusion that you did. But I want to make sure that everyone knows that you weren't harmed while you were in there. I mean, there's always being subjected the way you were to the heavy hand of government is going to be traumatizing no matter who you are. But what happened in the 5 weeks you were in there? Because I think when I spoke with your wife, Erin, she had mentioned that because you were taken into the facility, you had to go into a COVID quarantine for 2 weeks. And so what was that like? And then you would have been released to the general population, which actually gives me a bit more anxiety thinking about it, because there's some bad dudes in there. So let's begin with the first 2 weeks that you were in there. How did that go down?
Yeah, the first 2 weeks, I mean, they were challenging because I was in quarantine. It wasn't quite solitary. That gives it a bit of an inaccurate picture. I was on a normal pod. It's just that it was highly controlled because it was a quarantine pod. And so I was in my cell for basically 23 hours and 30 minutes a day, unless there was a visit from a chaplain or something like that. I was out for 15 minutes at a time. There was one day that I think I spent like 23 hours straight in my cell before I'd had a 15-minute break to get out and call my wife or have a shower, whatever the case is. And so, that was a bit challenging. Now, at the same time, it gave me some protection, excuse me, to be able to learn the culture that I was in and learn how things work. And so, I was certainly in my cell a lot, and initially only being allowed out by myself because I was under what they call an administrative watch. And so, it was an adjustment for sure, learning the ropes. I think by the end of the quarantine, I actually was looking forward to being in general public because I'd be able to interact with the guys, and I wanted to be able to have some human interaction by that point. There was obviously some nervousness, to your point, and not knowing exactly what to expect and not knowing how volatile things would be. But in that first 2 weeks, the way the guards related to me, as well as some of the guys that I did interact with, it was positive. And so I thought, well, if that carries on, things will go well in GP.
Tell me a bit about what is the culture. I mean, so many of us have never had that experience. What is the culture of remand? What did you find in those 2 weeks? What were you learning?
Well, you got to learn just how the whole system works as far as food is concerned, and your door just unlocks and then it locks, and you got to kind of figure out, okay, why is it unlocking right now, and why is it locking right now, and so it's a challenge to kind of figure out the schedule of things. There's obviously a certain culture as far as what you say, what you don't say. There's certain words you don't use, certain words you avoid, and do so at all costs. They're words that wouldn't normally be an issue outside and would be very benign, but there's certain names you don't call an inmate when you're in remand. You're learning just the interaction with the guards. You're just trying to get a handle on everything. I think it's even difficult to put my finger on. I had the chaplains that were coming to me and trying to get me up to speed on everything and help me understand what I was stepping into. But it's a bit of a blur to me in some respects. I haven't had enough time to really digest everything to be able to thoughtfully articulate just exactly what I experienced.
So when you went into what you're calling general public, what was that experience like? Because I think, I mean, you were in there because of an alleged violation of a health order. I'm sure there's some people in there for unpaid parking or speeding fines, but there's some bad people in there, isn't there?
Well, I mean, I presume so. I mean, I didn't ask everybody why they were in there. There were a couple of guys that I got to know, and I could ask them why they were in there. And one gentleman shared with me it was attempted murder. But they're at remand, so they're not convicted as yet. They're in process and going through the court system. But the guys were actually quite good to me. Now you need to understand that in a cell there are 4 radio stations. One is CHED. So a lot of guys are listening to CHED, and CHED, as you know, runs a news recap every 30 minutes on the hour and half hour. And as you can imagine, I was in that loop quite often. So everyone knew of me. They didn't necessarily know right away who I was, but that's one thing about the culture at remand is word spreads quickly. And so guys knew who I was before I'd met them, and guys were coming to my door and knocking on my door, wanting to speak with me, wanting to share their difficulties with me. I was able to share the gospel with them, talking to them through the door. I'd be locked in, they'd be on the other side, and we would be having a conversation together about the Lord. So I was able to do that. I had, one gentleman I recall, he was told that I was the pastor, and he was looking at me going like, no, he's not the guy. Really? He's the guy? No. And I said, yeah, I'm the guy. And he was like, man, you're like a celebrity, and guys were asking me to sign their Bibles and sign books and do stuff like that. So, the guys were very good to me.
Did that surprise you? Because I guess I might have thought that because you had taken such a public position, because you're Christian, I thought there's all kinds of reasons why because you had been in that environment before, I guess I would have thought there might have been all kinds of reasons why you might have been targeted.
I wasn't totally sure. I mean, it was just kind of putting your foot in and checking the temperature of the water and going step by step and learning as I went. And the more guys I interacted with, the more positive things were. I think in that context, they're trying to figure out if you're the real deal or are you a fraud. And so I think they're kind of watching you closely and want to see if you truly are who you say you are. And I think over time, by God's grace, I was able to win their hearts, and they knew that I was the real deal. And so I think I had the respect, and they were gracious to show that respect to me often.
That's an amazing story. Now, Erin expressed concern about a couple things. She said, number one, you're very active and very healthy. She was worried about your diet and whether you were staying healthy physically. Did that get resolved? Did you sort that out?
The health part was the hard part. So initially in quarantine, all I had was all I had was the food they were providing, no canteen. And really the food they provide is not suffice to fuel the body. And so I had to get through the first week without canteen, and then I got canteen, and then it was a matter of you're not eating the best food to supplement the lack of calories that you're taking in each day. And so after a couple of weeks of not eating as well as I could have been, I did have a health episode where I woke up dizzy one morning and I couldn't get out of bed that day. And that happens from time to time. And normally in normal life now I can manage that and avoid that. But in this case, I wasn't able to. So by the time I left, I think I had figured out how to utilize the canteen to be able to eat well, get the calories I need, but not put myself in jeopardy. But it takes some time, and I'm gluten free, for example. So there's those kinds of issues that I have to navigate, and so I think I got it in the end, but it was a challenge for sure. And maybe one of the biggest difficulties that I had, because obviously, if you can't eat well and get enough food, and what you are eating is making you, unable to get out of bed in the morning, that's a challenge.
No kidding. The other thing Aaron mentioned was just that you love intellectual challenge. And gosh, I mean, my husband was just giving me the gears because he said, you're constantly on your phone. I don't imagine that you were able to zip through and pass the time on your iPhone while you were in there, but 23 hours straight in your cell in those early days without a break. How did you keep from going stir crazy?
That's a great question. I found out again that I like doing word searches. So they were gracious enough to give me some word searches, and so that helped. Obviously, I spent time in the Word and prayer. That was significant. My mind is incredibly active, so I probably killed a lot of time just meditating and thinking on all of the matters that I was facing at that point in time. So yeah, I mean, it was a challenge, and it's a bit of a blur. I mean, when you look at it, 5 weeks went by fast. In another sense, the first day seems like a long time ago. And so it was a challenge staying active. I was able to do some exercises in my cell to keep the heart beating a little bit. And that was good. And then, initially in quarantine, I was on my own for most of that. Then I went into GP, was given a cellmate. And so we kind of kept each other stimulated a little bit with our conversations and discussions and stuff like that.
How did that relationship go with your cellmate?
Yeah, it was good. We took a little bit to really gel, but he took a liking to me early on, and even before we were cellmates. So it was sort of providential that the Lord marked him out to be my cellmate, and so we had a decent thing going on. He's called me since he's been in the remand, or since I've left rather, and we'll probably keep in touch. He calls me his pastor now, and so we had a pretty good thing. He liked when I read the Bible to him. I would sing hymns from time to time, and he loved when I sung those songs. So he was good. He was a good guy. He looked out for me, and I think he may have done some things just to make sure that everybody was going to take care of me a little bit. And so he was an ally for sure.
That's amazing. Let's talk a bit about the guards. I mean, I feel badly for the corrections officers because there are a lot of people who made decisions that put you in that environment. And now they're the ones having to manage the situation and manage their relationship with you. How did you find the guards interacted with you?
Yeah, the guards were pretty good. I mean, I think they were very respectful, often expressed support for what I was doing. They were kind to me for the most part. And so I look fondly on a number of my interactions with the guards. There was one guard, for example, that I had in the quarantine, and he ended up coming into my pod on GP, and I saw him behind the desk and actually called down to the guards and just said, hey, can you put the gentleman that's behind you on the intercom? And so he and I had a bit of a chat and reconnected that way. He was a very supportive guy. So yeah, they were overall very good to me and kind to me. And I didn't get to interact a great deal with them one-on-one for any length of time. So I didn't have really solid conversations with them about the Lord, for example, as I would have liked. There's a bit of a distance that's kept between guards and inmates, but for the most part, I think they were on their best behavior because I was there.
Let's talk about how you're feeling about the system. I mean, but did you ever have an experience that was anything like that? It's so surreal. I mean, I don't know if there's any time that you've been doing ministry around the world where you face such conditions as you did over these past 5 weeks, but have you been able to process that?
I mean, it's unlike anything I've ever experienced in one sense. Now, I think it's helpful to indicate for context's sake that I did grow up in Scarborough, Ontario. and I wasn't saved until I was 23 years old. So I acquired a healthy degree of street sense just from my first 23 years on this green earth. So I didn't feel like I was completely ill-equipped to be able to interact with a wide variety of individuals that I would in prison. And there is a wide spectrum of character in prison. You've got older men, younger men, you've got guys that are maybe in gangs, other guys that wouldn't be in gangs. And so there's a wide variety of guys in prison, and I was able to interact with all of them and relate to each one in a way that was I think helpful. And so yeah, I mean, it's a world like I've never been a part of in one sense, but it's also just it's just the world, but in a different context. And so I've grown up in this world, I live in this world, and so it's not totally alien, but yeah, there are certainly elements that are different for sure.
Well, I think we're all grateful, but the experience, as bad as it was so relatively positive. So let's now talk about how you're feeling towards government, because you mentioned that Ched was playing on the radio. I was so mad at Jason Kenney that day. I couldn't believe when Dr. Dina Hinshaw was asked about it in her update. And I played a portion of what she said. And essentially she was saying, well, don't blame the healthcare system. This isn't AHS. This is the decision of the RCMP who chose to enforce it. And it's the decision of the court who chose to put him in this and behind bars. And I suppose it's the decision of the prosecutor to choose to put it forward. And I just thought, wow, is that ever a dodge? The only reason any of this is happening was because of Dr. Dina Hinshaw's health orders, which were approved by Premier Jason Kenney. And I couldn't believe that they were sort of blaming everybody else along the path for what had happened to you. So tell me how you're perceiving it, Now, first of all, I think you told me that you actually heard me giving the premier the gears that day. I wonder how did you feel about that?
I felt fantastic. I mean, Ched had announced that he was going to be on with you, and so I was sure to catch that part of your show, and was just greatly encouraged that somebody would press him the way that you did. And so I was encouraged. I was grateful. I was looking forward to connecting with you once, Lord willing, I got out, so I could share that with you, and obviously I have. And so yeah, it was encouraging for that to take place. As it relates to like whether Jason Kenney could have brought about my release or not, and to what extent Dina Hinshaw was involved in my incarceration, I mean, that's all outside of my sphere of expertise. So I think I understand that AHS is the one that does the enforcement, that they are enforcing Dina Hinshaw's health orders, that the RCMP is leveraged by AHS to bring about enforcement. And so I think there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. To what extent each cook is involved, I don't really know. That's beyond my pay grade.
I guess the thing I'm trying to sort through here is that there's always discretion everywhere along the line of enforcement. There's discretion for officers to choose whether they're going to pursue a charge. There's discretion for the court to determine whether they're going to keep you behind bars. There's discretion for a prosecutor to determine whether they have a reasonable chance of conviction. And I'm just trying to figure out why everyone was so intent on throwing the book at you. Do you have some insights as to why that would be?
Well, I think when it comes down to it, going the route of the undertaking, no one believed that if I was faced with a condition that was either release or comply, that I would say I can't comply. So again, I think their goal was to bring about compliance. That didn't bring about compliance, and ultimately backfired. And I don't know that they've used that approach on any other pastor since then, and I'm not sure they will, at least for now. And so I think they were just trying to utilize a measure they could to get me to comply with the health orders, and that was the approach they took, and it backfired immensely. And so all they want is compliance. If we would just comply, everything would be well. And we just can't comply with their health orders because their health orders alter our corporate gathering to such an extent that it's no longer the corporate gathering. And so if we were in compliance with Alberta Health Services this past year, we would be a year into not having a corporate gathering where we as a local church come together as one body and worship the Lord Jesus Christ. And we just can't do that.
Well, and this is the interesting part. And again, I want to understand why your interpretation of scripture is different than other pastors who have acquiesced, who have changed the way they meet to fall into alignment with the different rules in each province. So I want to get to that. But you you waited them out for 5 weeks. Can you shed some light? And I don't want to do anything that might harm your case, because you are ultimately going to be going to trial in May, as I understand it. But they backed down on the charges to the point where you didn't have to sign that undertaking, because I saw you up behind the pulpit on Sunday. So that said to me that you're allowed to be there, and they didn't race up to arrest you then. So how did all of that come together? And we know that your lawyer, James Kitchen, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, has been doing a lot of work on your behalf. What do you think happened there?
Well, I think, a lawyer was added to my case, and he was pretty committed to trying to get me out of jail. And so he went to the Crown and just sought to see if there was any way that the Crown would be willing to adjust the condition in order to allow me to be released, and propose at that point in time that there be a dropping of the condition down to a basic keep the peace, which is just standard for anyone who is released on bail. And I actually wouldn't have taken that anyway, because keep the peace, as you know, means keep the law. And at present, the legal system is functioning as though what Dina Hinshaw is doing and her health orders are law. And therefore, if I was to be released on that condition and then host a gathering, I'd be in violation of my bail condition. And that opens up a huge can of worms beyond what I was already in the midst of. And so that didn't appeal to me at all. And ultimately, it's hard to know exactly how it all went from there. But the Crown came back with an offer that just recognized, in my estimation, they understood my conviction. I think they were realizing that I wasn't just making a public statement, that this was not just some sort of political revolutionary act on my behalf, that I was truly on principle and conviction before the Lord Jesus Christ. And so they made an offer that allowed me to plead guilty to something that I did, while at the same time allowing me to do so without being repentant. And I can say it that way because obviously the charge that's still on the table in some senses is for me, because I want to contest the legitimacy of these laws. And so by virtue of holding that charge over my head, it gives me an opportunity to go to war through my legal team with the legitimacy of these laws. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know if that helps to kind of what the Crown did is they gave me an offer that it almost checked off every possible box that would remove the condition and allow me to come out and do what I've always been doing. And so, I guess I could have been some sort of, dug my heels in and waited out the Crown, and maybe they would have dropped all the charges, but that just wasn't why I was there. I was there because they were trying to prevent me from shepherding the flock at Grace Life Church. That's my responsibility before Christ. And so to dig my heels in and try and, get them to drop all of the charges was shifting what it was all about for me. And so I said, well, you know what? I did breach the condition in that undertaking. I never agreed to the condition. I never told them I would comply with that condition. In fact, I told them I couldn't comply with that condition. And so I didn't violate my word or my integrity, but I did violate the undertaking itself. And we would have tested that as well in terms of testing the legitimacy of that approach with me in my trial. But in the end, I pled guilty to what I did. And
you were prepared though to stay there until your trial in May, were you?
Well, I have to be honest. While I was in there, I wasn't sure I was ever going to get out. Wow. I mean, I had to be okay with the possibility that I might never get out of jail. And so I was prepared to be there until May. That's not because it was easy. There were moments when it was difficult for sure, but at the end of the day, when you're functioning on the basis of a conviction that you have from God, it's what carries you through all of those moments of difficulty and weakness. So, yeah.
Let's talk then what led up to the December 20th sermon that you gave. So there's a few things we'll have to go back to, because you did honor the health orders like all of us did back in March, April, when it was really unclear what this disease was going to do, who it was going to affect, how harmful it was going to be. So what changed for you? So why and I think maybe that's something that the authorities don't understand. It was, well, you're willing to do this back in March, April. What's the big deal now that we're telling you to do it again in November? Tell us what changed in your view.
Well, I mean, we complied initially reluctantly. Obviously we were ignorant with respect to the virus. We didn't know how severe it was. The government was projecting it to be incredibly severe. We didn't have a good handle on the law, how our country works, how our legal system works. And then two, we had some areas of our theology that hadn't ever really been tested, and we had to refine them. Like, for example, what is our response to government? We're commanded in Romans 13 to be subject to government. We know there's a limit on that because we know there's a point when we obey God, not man. And so when is that? And does this circumstance call for civil disobedience where we obey God, not man? And so, it was a challenge to work through all those issues. And so we initially comply. We're initially complying with the health orders and capacity limits that are in place. And then over time, as the data rolls in and as we wrestle through the scriptures and what they teach on this matter, and as the public health emergency that was declared came to an end, we believed it was time to open up, that we had sufficient reason theologically and also medically and scientifically to open our doors and not refuse our people from coming to worship.
I'd love to know what you were looking at as your sources to come to that conclusion, because I was looking at all kinds of videos to come to that conclusion myself. I thought the data was very clear that those who are most at risk were those over the age of 70 with pre-existing conditions, those under the age of 40, very small risk. Children actually can withstand COVID better than they can influenza. There seemed to me to be a lot of information out there to come to that conclusion, but our politicians don't seem to be able to access it because they're not coming to the same conclusion. So what is it that you were looking at that caused you to sort of rethink what we were being told?
Well, I think on the one hand, all you have to do is look at the statistics that are on Alberta Health. I mean, the average age of those who are dying is about 82 years old. And let's just be honest, COVID-19 is real. It has obviously at least contributed to the loss of life among those who have died related to COVID-19. And I'm not talking about those who have died as a result of lockdown measures. I mean, those who with comorbidities contracted the virus and that it was either that they died from their comorbidities or from the virus itself, whether it was with COVID or from COVID. We know that there are those who have died, but the actual number itself, though every death is significant, and though I wouldn't want to minimize the loss of life in any way, shape, or form, we do live in a fallen world, and death is a reality, and it's always been a reality. It was a reality in 2019 and 2018 and every year prior to that. And so when you look at the statistics in terms of number of cases against the total population of Alberta, the number of people that die and have died in light of the number of people who have supposedly contracted the virus, I think you just look at the stats that are on Alberta Health and you realize that this is not nearly as severe as the government has made it out to be. And I, in my December 20th sermon, I went through some of these statistics and pointed out at that time that there were 841 COVID-related deaths, and that was in 10 months, and that's just not. Obviously every life matters, but statistically, that's not significant enough to warrant fundamentally altering the way that we live. And so, with statistics like that, you just come to realize that this is overblown. And then you go, okay, well, so why is it then that they're doing this? Well, it's because they want to protect the healthcare system. Well, even that is a huge if, that the healthcare system could or might be stressed. And so we're going to mortgage everything else. We're going to mortgage every other sphere of life just so we can hopefully avoid not stressing our healthcare system. And I think even that's misguided. That's not the right approach to an emergency. And So
let's then talk about how you brought your parishioners along with you on that, because by December 20th, I think you had already had quite a bit of interaction with AHS, and I'm wondering how you kind of introduced this to your parishioners, that it really was their choice, whether they came in person or whether they decided to come virtually. Aaron told us that you have a section of the church that's cordoned off in case people want to sit behind plexiglass. Like you're trying to accommodate everybody's needs. But I'm wondering how that came through in how you communicated that to the people who go to your church.
Well, in the first place, I was preaching. I preached on Romans 13 back in May or June. I preached on another passage that's important in the discussion is in Hebrews 10. So there was some preaching that went into it. There was internal messaging that we were giving to our people as we answered questions and shared with them, here's our plan, here's what we're doing. Then questions would come back to us. We would write answers to those questions to make sure that we were helping people understand where we were coming from with regard to government, the medicine, the science, all of these issues. So we just shepherded our people and informed them and equipped them and left it in their hands as capable, intelligent adults to make their own decision and assess their own risk level. And just over time, as we gathered, and this is really important for people to understand, we have met for nearly 40 Sundays in a row. And we I forget exactly what the number is, but we're somewhere 35, 40 Sundays, and we haven't had a single COVID case touch our gathering, our Sunday gathering. So people over time, initially you are a little bit nervous and you've just been bombarded by mainstream media who touts cases and deaths all the time. And so initially there might have been some reluctance, but over time, our people are going, it's safe. We can gather.
Can you talk? Can you shed some light? Because I know that there are those you did have some COVID positive individuals who had gone to a church service, but if I'm understanding, and that was last summer, but if I'm understanding it, they tested positive, but they didn't get it at the church, and they didn't spread it to anyone at the church. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there are 2 Sundays where we had an individual who was at our gathering and then tested positive after the fact. And so that suggests that they were at our gathering with COVID-19, with the infection. And there were tests that took place as a result of that. We did our own internal contact tracing. There were people that went and got tested, and we determined that there was no transmission of the virus. Now, at that time, we took, out of an abundance of caution, we shut down our services, all ministries, for 2 weeks. And just ensured that we weren't in this perpetual spreading of the virus. And once we had ensured that was the case, we opened back up again and then carried on. And I should say this, I mean, even now, we have modified the way that we're doing ministry. The hill that we believe we need to die on is Sunday, but we have modified the way we're doing youth ministry, women's ministry. We're doing our Bible studies now in our facility so people can be, socially distanced and everything else. So it's not like we're just blowing through every single stop sign that's being raised. It's just that we can't comply with Sunday. Sunday is essential. Sunday is critical. It's critical to the spiritual health and well-being of our people. And so we just can't compromise on Sundays.
Now, I know you gave an hour sermon on this, and so I'm going to see if you can compress your theology around the importance of meeting as a corporate body, I think is the term that you're using. And because I think people who may not be churchgoers might not understand how you're interpreting scripture and why you feel so strongly about this. Because I'll give you an example. Like I have a restaurant with my husband. We see 300 people a week through the restaurant. We're shopping at Costco. We're shopping at No Frills. We're around literally hundreds of people in those environments. But I still avoid crowds. I don't go to large social gatherings. And so every one of us has our own little way of making our lives normal. And every one of us has our own lines that we're prepared to stay behind. But for those who don't understand why this was such an important line for you, maybe you can tell us why was Sunday a hill to die on?
Well, I think the impression that people have is that a service is an incredibly passive endeavor, that it's a spectator sport. And so basically you can just divide your gathering up into as many services as possible, and it's just a matter of cycling people in and cycling them out. It's like going to a hockey game, and you come to the game and you watch the game and you leave. And that's just not the corporate gathering. The corporate gathering isn't even just the structured part of the service. So it's not even just what happens during the service itself. The gathering is what takes place prior to the service, during the service, and after the service. And so there are elements of the service that certainly require a heavy workload on me and other pastors as we preach the word, the music team as they lead us in song. But there is a fellowship component, a one anothering, that also feeds into that. And so when you look at the essential elements of a corporate gathering, the preaching of the word, the reading of scripture, prayer, fellowship, the ordinances, when you look at the actual health orders that are in place, they preclude us from being able to carry out those essential elements. We can't practice the one another's with masks on, where we can't see facial expression. We can't practice the one another's while we stand 6 feet apart with a mask on, and we can't even hear the other person speak. The service is an active one anothering. It's relational. It's not just come and go. We're not that kind of a church. And I think that might touch on why other churches can comply, because I think it's possible their churches aren't functioning quite like a true church is supposed to. And so people just come and the sermon's over and the song is sung and boom, the place is empty. That's not the case with our church. Our church is there for hours after the service, talking to one another, serving one another, loving one another. And so we just have a true, vibrant fellowship, and there's no way that we can comply with the health orders and fulfill those aspects. And so you have to ask the next question, okay, well, is COVID-19 severe enough to warrant us fundamentally altering everything? I mean, if we do things the way that we've always done them, are people going to die? And the answer that we've proven is no. The only person that has died at Grace Life Church is a gentleman who died because he couldn't get the health care he needed. He died sooner than he would have because he could not get the radiation treatment he needed for cancer. And so that's not to say that we won't have COVID deaths. It's not to say that we won't lose a life to COVID. We're not immune from the virus, but it's a risk that we're willing to assume, just like we're willing to get into our car and drive, and there are risks associated with that. I was told at one point in time, you are more likely to die from a gunshot in Calgary than you are to die from COVID-19. There are risks in life, and you have to decide whether or not you're willing to assume those risks. And we are adults and need to make those calls on our own. We don't need the government to dictate to us how to make real life adult decisions.
Can you talk about singing? I think when you were talking about how your church conducts itself, I remember having a lovely old dear who came in. She was so excited to be going back to church, but at their church, they hummed. That was the way that they stayed within Dina Hinshaw's health orders. And I know that you feel very strongly about singing as part of the worship service on Sunday. Can you explain why?
Well, because it's in the scriptures. I mean, we're to be filled with the Spirit. The evidence that we're filled with the Spirit is that we sing, admonishing one another, teaching one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. It's almost a command, if it's not exegetically a command, that singing is the byproduct of being filled with the Spirit. God is worthy of worship. Singing is the way that we express praise to God. I just think it is unbelievable that the government would have the audacity to tell Christians who worship the Lord Jesus Christ that they can't sing. Unbelievable. So
tell me what your service would, what do you think it is that AHS wants you to do? So I need to understand when you came on their radar, because the impression they've given the public through the various speeches that they've given, or the press conferences and statements they've given, is that they tried, kept working with you, kept trying to get you into compliance, and it just didn't work. What is it that they wanted you to do?
Well, they just want us to comply. I mean, I don't know that there was a lot of working with us. They came in, told us what we're supposed to be doing. We're saying, yeah, we can't do that, and we're at a bit of a stalemate. There hasn't been any kind of a discussion. I mean, we're not willing to get together with AHS and have a negotiation and sort of come to a mutual agreement about what it is that we can do and can't do. That's not their place. We would be entering into what I would call pastoral malpractice to go to AHS and begin to negotiate with them the terms of worship. Only Jesus gets to dictate the terms of worship. And so yeah, have they worked with us? I wouldn't say it was working with us. I mean, they are intensely legalistic with their health orders, and they want us to comply with those health orders, and we can't do that and be faithful to Christ. And so that has us where we are today.
So let me just help me understand where we're at with the current health orders, because they keep changing. And I know that retail is now, I think, gone up to 25% capacity that they're allowed. Did you follow suit? I mean, under the health orders, are you allowed to have 25% capacity? Is it only 15%? Is that one of the things they would expect of you?
Well, I got to be honest, and I just want to be honest. Like, I don't pay a ton of attention to the health orders. You know, if I think we're at 15% right now, and if we went up to 50, it would make no difference. Like, we're gonna do what we believe we're called to do. So whether it's 15% or 0% or 75%, it really makes no difference to us. The terms of worship, the essential elements of the gathering are non-negotiable for us. And so to me, you know, it's interesting to listen to what they provide in their updates and what changes they make. But at the end of the day, it doesn't shape what we do or why we do it.
So how big is your congregation? How many people can you seat in your capacity?
That's a great question. And I think we're trying to figure that out. Prior to my imprisonment, we were trying to tamp down the number of visitors that were coming to our church. We didn't want all of Edmonton coming to Grace Life Church. We couldn't accommodate that. And so we were prioritizing our own congregation and trying to limit the number of visitors rather that were coming to our church. And then when I ended up imprisoned, you know, that kind of went out the window, and all of Edmonton was all of a sudden at our church again, or for the first time. So, you know, our I don't even know exactly what our fire capacity is. It's 6 something, and we're having on Sundays right now, we're having to turn people away because we're reaching that. Now, at that point, someone's going to say, well, so James, why are you complying with the fire code and not with the health orders? Well, there's a fundamental difference. The fire code is a civil issue. It's not infringing on the terms of worship. It's a civil matter that governs the safety of a facility with respect to fire. And so it's not infringing on the headship and lordship of Christ over his church. And so that's why that's different. It's not the same thing.
So let me tell you what your critics would say. They would say that the gatherings in and of themselves create a risk, especially to the vulnerable in your congregation. And would that not be equivalent to abiding by the fire code? You want to abide by some of those same health orders while we're in the middle of what they're describing as a crisis?
Well, so if we're a person or two over the fire code, I'm sure, you know, the safety factor isn't that significant. But that aside, we've been meeting for nearly 40 Sundays, and it's evident, apparent that no one's at risk, and if they are at risk, that's a risk that they are willing to take. Why am I on the hook for the decision of someone else who's willing to be at our church? I mean, that's a whole thing in and of itself. There are people who are informed and intelligent and bright, and they want to be at church. Why am I responsible to tell them not to? And furthermore, how can I, as their pastor, do that? How can I tell them that they're not permitted to worship? I can't do that.
Let me ask you, do you mind if I ask you to sort of elaborate on that a bit? Because I think there's an expectation that you would talk to your more senior congregants, and you would know their health status, probably because of various interactions that you have with them. And you might want to give them the advice, maybe you should stay home until this is all over. Do you not see that as part of your role?
Well, I think what I would do is work with them. And so there were situations where we would have individuals who could have comorbidities, and they would say that they're not feeling totally comfortable, or whatever the case is. I remember one woman, she came and was coming, and I was a bit surprised that she was there, and was certainly concerned for her and her well-being. And so I would interact with her and just let her know that I totally understand if she would prefer to live stream. And so we love our people that way. We don't force them to be there.
We're going to stop there for hour one. We're just going into a break here in a few minutes, but that was Pastor James Coates, just recently freed from jail. He spent 5 weeks inside the jail cell, and he was going through everything that everything that went down, the adjustment, dealing with everything. Now that he's out, the pressure is mounting. His case is in May. As people are familiar, maybe they're not, Pastor James Coates is my former pastor, an incredible man of God. I remember being at the church many times. Actually, he was doing marriage counseling with Rachel and I. So again, this is very truly personal for me. Just a time that we spent even at James and Aaron's place for dinner. We got very, very close with them. So again, this is just really amazing to see that he's standing his ground. He's not backing down. And really, he's the only voice right now in all of Canada. It blows my mind, of all people in Canada, someone out of Edmonton, Alberta, my former pastor, Pastor James Coates, he's the guy that's leading the charge in standing up, and truly at the cost of even going to jail, spending 5 weeks. And again, his case is still coming up in May. Not only is he charged, but the church as an entity has been charged. So they stand trial here in May. It's going to get interesting, folks. It's going to get really interesting. Really appreciate you all tuning in tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in on Revolution Radio. It is listener supported. Really do appreciate all your support. And everyone that is tuning in on YouTube, that's youtube.com/celebrate truth. Really do appreciate your support. You're listening to an exclusive interview, the first one, Pastor James out of jail, talking with Danielle Smith from Western Standard. And again, the link is in the description if you want to check out their channel or check out this interview in its entirety, but we will be covering most of it for this show. We've got a lot more in hour 2 coming up. And just so you're familiar, we still got the special going on with Scientism Exposed and Scientism Exposed 2. You can get the whole thing and get a free DVD. You can go to celebratetruth.org. That's celebratetruth.org. You can check that out there. The specials are up, and with any order, you will get a free DVD. Doesn't matter what you order, you're getting a free DVD. So check that out at celebratetruth.org, and really do appreciate your support. We got a lot of really awesome guests coming up here in 2021. Wanted to make sure that we had this special broadcast in with James, making sure that everyone is up to date. If you go back, you will see in the playlist, I've done, I think, 3 shows. This would be the 4th show on Pastor James Coates. Way back when it first started in December, I believe. That's what the sermon they were talking about, and covering it all the way through January, February, into March, and now we're into April. And next month is when he will stand trial. Stand trial for what? Opening his church. For simply having church. And again, with all the stuff that we're seeing, I don't know what's happening. In Ontario, just heard that they went into another lockdown, 30-day lockdown. Toronto, Ontario, it's getting crazy. But don't go anywhere. We got lots more coming up in hour 2. This is just hour 1, guys. We got more coming in hour 2. So don't go anywhere. You're going to hear a lot more from Pastor James Coates and the story of being put in jail for having church. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Be evasive, but that doesn't mean that they're telling the truth as opposed to fiction.
And in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, and there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came and unto the daughters of men, indicating that there were giants before the Nephilim.
And sons of God, plural. They weren't talking about Jesus coming down.
No, that's right. Yeah.
I'm Steve Crawford, host of Factor Theory Live. Join me every Sunday night from 10 p.m. till midnight Eastern Standard Time on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Check it out.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Galactic Interstellar Council on Revolution Radio Studio A, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Join us as we traverse the starseed paradigm, as expressed in the time-space continuum that we know as the divine expression of love and light. Integrating this conscious unity into the galactic paradigm. So welcome all, both terrestrial beings and galactic beings as one. So be it. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves. Because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. You can torture us and bomb us. Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us.
Good evening.
Are you awake yet? I hope. We've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. The time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
And so I might give my suggestion that, hey, why don't you stay back for a little bit right now? I don't necessarily recall doing that because I don't recall the conversations developing that way. But I've always been very sensitive to folks that want to be home and live stream. And so I'm not compelling people to come. I'm just opening my doors and letting them decide. And even back to the original question about safety, I think that question is entirely assuming the narrative that's being spun by the mainstream media and our government that people are actually unsafe, that COVID-19 is this legitimate threat. I would say unequivocally, the lockdown measures are the greatest threat to Albertans. It's not the virus. It's the cure that is the problem. And so I just think the entire premise of the question is rooted in the echo chamber of the mainstream media and the government, and that people, look, I don't feel safe in this society. I don't feel safe when I go into Costco and everyone's wearing a mask. I don't feel safe knowing that everyone is staying at home right now. I feel safer when someone takes their mask off and speaks to me face to face. When I'm at a restaurant and the server has a mask on his face, I don't feel safe. I want to see him smile. I want to interact with him and engage with him or her. Like I don't feel safe in this society right now. And so those that don't feel safe are those who have just basically taken the narrative of the mainstream media and have drunk the Kool-Aid. And I can say that because I'm a pastor of a church that's been meeting for nearly 40 weeks, and it's safe. We're happy. We're healthy. And so we're showing Albertans that they don't need to be afraid. Now, I'm not saying throw caution to the wind. I'm not saying don't be responsible. I'm just saying that we can meet and that the Alberta that's being created right now is far more unsafe than anything COVID-19 has brought upon us.
You know, it's interesting. Even as I asked you the question, I'm sort of thinking through. I had a 98-year-old customer who was there with his 75-year-old son, and to even think that I would presume to tell them, do you think it's safe for you to be out here? I mean, I think there's sort of this expectation that you would take that role, but no one's asking the retail clerk at Costco or the restaurant server to have that same kind of paternalistic attitude towards the people who come to receive service there. What do you think the attitude is of your parishioners? Like, did you see over time that they became more and more comfortable wanting to attend service face to face? Because I don't know that that's happening everywhere, because it does seem like the majority, maybe virtually all churches, I don't know if any other church is in the crosshairs the way you are, but it seems like virtually every other church is operating within those rules. And maybe that's an indication of the comfort level of the congregation being low. Why is your congregation so keen to meet?
Well, let's be clear. There are other churches in this province that are open and are doing things just as we are. We are not the only ones. And that's another bit of misinformation coming from our government that all the other churches in the province are complying with the health orders. No, that's not the case. Whether it's in Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Lacrete, Grand Prairie, here in Edmonton, Calgary, there are churches that are open all over the place. And so just to address that, and I probably forgot your question. What was your question again?
I was just wondering if you noticed that over time your congregants were feeling more comfortable coming out.
Yeah, I think over time, absolutely. I think everyone's wrestling with, what's our response to government in this context? What is the severity level of the virus itself? It's taken time for folks to dot the I's and cross the T's. And as we've continued to meet over time, there's no question that our gathering has increased. Even the sermon that I preached on December 20th, that helped people solidify the theological side of things, and so our people began to start to come back even more so following that sermon. So it's been over time. It's been teaching. It's been preaching. It's just been the time that's passed with respect to COVID-19 to be able to see its true severity level. And so over time, our people have become more and more comfortable, for sure.
Do you know what I find so ironic is the physical meeting is so important to you as the pastor, but I bet you have more people now watching you online than you do coming to church. Isn't that a funny irony?
Yeah, it is. And I'm sure a lot of them wish they could be with us in person. But yeah, I mean, it is. There's no question. Our church has gotten more visibility as a result of this, and that's not been the goal. That's not been the aim. I'm quite happy to just lead a tranquil and quiet life, to care for my flock, to fly under the radar, to love our people and minister the word of God to them. I'm not relishing the attention that we're getting. I don't love this new normal that I'm entering into. But at the end of the day, we have to be faithful to our Lord, and He's given us this spotlight, and all we can do is be faithful.
I want to ask you, I'm putting you in a bit of a tough position asking this question, but there are other pastors that are sort of putting pressure on you to sort of toe the line, either directly or in public with their statements. There are other pastors who say we can make this work, and there are other pastors who are doing multiple different services or doing online. And I'm trying to I know, I mean, it sort of begs the question, if they have found a way to look at scripture and interpret the way they have, so that they can come to terms with doing their work within the context of the health orders, why can't you?
Well, I think, at the end of the day, they're responsible before the Lord. They're going to give an account for their handling of scripture. They're shepherd of the flock. The Bible talks about what they call the bema seat of Christ, the judgment seat of Christ. So I am going to stand before the Lord Jesus Christ and give him an account for my shepherd care of the flock at Grace Life. When I do that, I'm going to be standing alone. There isn't going to be anybody with me. I'm not going to be able to, there's not going to be anyone sharing their opinion at that point in time. There's going to be one judge and one assessment, and I need to live my life with that judgment seat in view. It's an assessment and an evaluation of my life and faithfulness. And I want to go into that moment with a clear conscience. I want to go into that moment believing that I have done what I was called to do. And so they're going to do that. And they need to live their lives with that moment in view. And they need to go into that moment with a clear conscience. And if they can do that, doing whatever they're doing, that's their prerogative. I'm not the judge. But all I can do is be responsible for what I'm doing, be faithful to Christ in accordance with his word. And I'm going to study his word and seek to be careful with his word and its application to our church and body life. And I'm not doing that alone. I'm doing that in the context of a plurality of elders. We're a leadership team. It's not just all on me. I'm not a shot caller. I'm not leading this church on my own. There's at least 8 of us that are involved in leadership at this point in time. And so yeah, I don't mind if people disagree with me. I'm not concerned about their opinion on what I'm doing. I care about the Lord Jesus Christ and what he has to say.
Can you elaborate? I don't know if you can tell a story about what is so different about having that face-to-face communication and fellowship that you can't get online or virtually. I suppose my only real context is, as I've described to you, the business that I run, and I also have a cohort of 10 people that are very precious to me. But what is it that is so important to you about the fellowship that you just can't get by calling people on the phone or doing FaceTime with them or just having the virtual experience?
Well, you know what, a helpful way to kind of illustrate that is I was just in jail for 5 weeks, and I was apart from my family for 5 weeks, from my church for 5 weeks. I could call my wife on the phone. I could speak to my children, but I couldn't be with them. And I think that alone should illustrate the difference. I shouldn't even need to say anything more.
You don't.
That seals the deal.
Yeah.
So being with family, friends, communicating, spending time together, loving one another, hugging one another, seeing one another, that can't be, virtual does not replicate that. Right. And obviously we're thankful for technology. You and I are doing this right now. It might be better to do it in person, but at the end of the day, virtual, and then furthermore, from a theological point of view, when it comes to the essential elements of the gathering, you can't fellowship and do the one another's virtually, not to the same extent that you would if you're gathering together in person. And anyway, more could be said on that, but I think it's self-evident.
Oh, I think you illustrate it well. The other sermon I want you to talk about is February the 14th, because I'm a libertarian. I tend to think that the government that governs best governs least. And I don't want government involved in my life. But it's interesting because when the premier was sort of defending the stance of his government in putting you behind bars, he talked about a libertarian speech that you had given. And I thought, okay, I better listen to this. And then when I listened to it, I thought, no, this is a real law and order type of speech. Like you're not some kind of anarchist. You actually believe in law and order, and that even law and order has a scriptural basis. And so I wonder if you could just walk us through some of that discussion so that we understand where the line is drawn. Where is it that you give unto Caesar unto Caesar, but then there's a point where, no, sorry, Caesar, you're not welcome here. Can you illustrate that a little bit for us?
Yeah. So back in the garden before the fall, God commissioned Adam and Eve to, and therefore all of mankind, to exercise dominion over the earth, to subdue the earth, and that would require procreation, having families. It would require tilling the soil, utilizing everything in the earth to build and develop. All of our technology develops out of that. And so God has given to mankind the responsibility to exercise dominion over the earth. And for mankind to effectively do that, especially now in a fallen world, since Adam and Eve fell into sin, we need government to ensure that that takes place. And the government's fundamental role at that point in time is to ensure that the inalienable rights that are given to us by God to complete our kingdom mandate on the earth, that they protect those rights, the rights to work. I mean, that's an amazing thing. God has given to mankind the right to work. It is a God-given right that he has given to mankind. And the government right now is actually stepping in and saying, like, nope, you can't work right now. And not only are you not allowed to work right now, we're going to give you a check. So we're going to print some money, and we're going to give you a check so that we offset whatever your losses from not working. That's the government getting into a lane that is not theirs. Their responsibility is to protect our right to life, to protect our right to work, to protect our right to worship. And so I think that's the issue right now. The government is stepping out of its lane and is trying to balance our civil liberties with the harms of the lockdowns. And that's just not their responsibility. The government is not supposed to. I don't need the government to keep me from a virus. I just don't need them to do that. I don't want the government to protect me from a virus. I mean, they can certainly give me information and help me and equip me with whatever they think I need to know so that I can be responsible and intelligent, but it's not their responsibility to protect me from a virus. So fundamentally, we have rights the government is to recognize. Right now, the government is infringing on those liberties, and therefore they're not doing their job. Their job is to protect them. And as a result, we are seeing great harm to human flourishing in our province.
I wonder if you have a stronger case because you're a church and because religious freedom in particular is articulated in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I just watched, sadly, somebody posted that Outlaws has thrown in the towel. They were one of the first businesses in Calgary to try to fight the unfair health orders. And so, but they had AHS pull their food permit, and AGLC pull their liquor permit, and they had their business license pulled. And they just said it was too much administrative hassle, too many fronts that they had to fight. I wonder if, do you feel like you might have a stronger case because we're talking about religious freedom?
Well, this is going to be kind of a long-winded response. I want to be very clear that when it comes to what we're doing as a local church, we are simply doing what we're doing in obedience to Christ as we seek to be faithful as his people. I'm seeking to be faithful as a pastor and a shepherd. And so the pillar upon which everything is happening in our lives right now as a church and myself as a pastor is my desire to obey Christ. Now, what happens is this. when you build that pillar, you need to stand up on it and start looking at, okay, well, what about government? What about neighbor? And is obedience to Christ as it relates to our corporate life as a church, is that consistent with loving my neighbor and loving the government? And you realize it is. It absolutely, these are not at odds with each other. And so it's on this pillar of obedience to Christ that I come to realize that I'm loving my neighbor in this regard. Now, stepping into that on top of that pillar, you start to look at the legal side of it. And in accord with the charter, churches do have rights that businesses don't. And so there's no question that we have protections under the charter that businesses don't have, and that in love for neighbor also gives us the impetus to take this stand. Because, I remember hearing of a gentleman speaking to one of my lawyers, and my lawyer telling him, at the end of the day, businesses don't have the protections that churches have. And so you just don't have the same protections in the charter. And he said, well, what's the church doing? And at that time, the answer was effectively nothing. And so local churches have these rights that are built into our charter, and they're not utilizing them in the name of obedience to government and in the name of loving neighbor and community. Meanwhile, we've got folks like you just mentioned whose businesses are coming to an end because they've been so crippled by the lockdown measures that their whole livelihoods are gone. And so you tell me what it means to love your neighbor at that particular point, what true love is. And let me just say this, right now, the narrative is that this is our World War II, that COVID-19 is our generation's World War II. And what it looks like to go to war with COVID-19 is to go home. To go home, be by yourself, and isolate from everyone around you. That is the sacrifice that is going to win this war against our World War II. Now, stop for a moment and think about World War II. Why did our forefathers go to the battlefield to fight? They went to fight and lay down their lives for our freedoms. Now, was it safe for them to go to a foreign land and die? Was it healthy for them to go to a foreign land and die? It shocks me that somehow we have totally turned this on its head, so that sacrifice is going home and isolating, and that what we're doing in being faithful to Christ and also faithful to our neighbor by meeting and exercising our civil liberties, that we're the ones that are selfish and self-centered. I think that is entirely backwards. And so there's a real sense in which, if this is our World War II, the right response is not to go home. The right response is to exercise your civil liberties. And obviously churches have a huge part to play in that, because we have so many protections under the charter.
You've probably seen, I don't know, maybe you've tuned out social media the same way I have, because it can be so hostile and ignorant. But I've seen people take the exact opposite view of you, and just the rotten things that Aaron said. Kids are saying to your kids, this idea that you're somehow harming society. Let's talk about it on a couple levels. First, are you surprised at how quickly people laid down liberty and how quickly they fell into alignment with government, and how passive they've become? Because I'm shocked by it personally. And I didn't expect that we would see a 180-degree turn on embracing authoritarianism and these kinds of aggressive government actions in such a short period of time. How are you perceiving it? Why do you think that's happened?
It's a great question. I think we've just become more and more dependent on the government, and the government has gotten bigger and bigger. I think a lot of people see the government as this benevolent friend that is out for their best interests, and lack a healthy distrust for government. I'm certainly surprised at the way Alberta's responded. I'm shocked that, this is sort of the Texas of Canada, right? I'm shocked that we have rolled over the way that we have. And I think there's obviously an authoritarian, totalitarian push coming from the left wing. I'm coming to call it left wing supremacy. You have to be a left wing thinker or you're a moron. You have to be a left wing thinker or you're a white supremacist. You have to be a left wing thinker or you're a racist. I mean, and then, the big part is too, is it's the minority that's so loud. There's this silent majority here in Alberta, and maybe they're waking up because of, folks like us and what we're doing. But we need Albertans to stand up and simply peacefully and humbly and graciously practice their civil liberties. I saw a gentleman go into a supermarket without a mask and create this whole thing where he gets arrested. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about being a jerk. I'm talking about being a good law-abiding citizen and returning to your civil liberties and doing those things that are freely given to you by God to do, and allowing our government to realize that we're not persuaded by this narrative. We're not drinking the Kool-Aid on the severity of this virus. This not only seems to me to be a clear government overreach, it is an effort to increase government dependence and ultimately cripple the people, to make us so financially dependent on the government that they have all the power in the world to continue to do what they want to do. And that's not an Alberta that I want to be a part of. I'm at a point now where I would have a very difficult time standing for our national anthem. I'm not talking about going down on one knee. I'm talking about not being able to sing the true North strong and free. This nation is not free. And we sing in that song, God keep our land glorious and free. It is not glorious and free. That is a prayer that is being prayed in vain. And I'm appalled at the country that has become. And I will just say this, as relates to Premier Kenney, who I voted for, by the way, that he's not the man that we voted for. He's not the conservative man that we asked for, that we voted for, that he claimed he was. And I don't think the UCP party is going to survive with Jason Kenney. I think Jason Kenney is finished. I think he either needs to repent and step in line and be the man that he presented himself to be, or the UCP party needs a new leader, because I just do not think Albertans who voted for him are going to be willing to vote for him again the next time round. And we do not want an NDP government.
Well, you're now sounding a lot more like a libertarian. I have to wonder, were you as attuned to these political issues a year ago? Or, I mean, I think Erin, when I spoke with her, she just said, I had to really, she said this, that she had to educate herself about what the charter was. And she felt like perhaps she could have done more in the past. Now she's sort of fully awoken to what our rights are and the threat from government, that I don't know that she'll ever see the world the same way. What would you have been like a year ago before going through this experience?
Well, I think for quite some time now, I would say this: when I came out of seminary and got into ministry initially, I was like just entirely focused on the Word of God and ministering the Word of God, and that was my focus. And I would have faithful men come alongside me and say, James, you've got to be committed to the Scriptures, and I am, and that will never change. But you need to be able to understand what's happening in the world around you and the culture around you. And so providentially, I began to look at economics and indulge in that quite a bit, and that was a bit of a hobby for me. And so I began to understand how our banking system works and how our monetary theory is and all that. And then over time, I began to take an interest in American politics and began to be plugged in and dialed in on that. And so I've been able to see what's happening in the US and in that country politically. And so I think for sure, over the last 7 years or so, I've become more robustly dialed in on what's happening politically. And I think that's contributed to this time. I've been dialed in this entire time as well, to be able to see what's happening. And so I think it's just naturally through interest and invested time that I've begun to be able to round things out a little bit, that now at 41 years old, I'd be able to think intelligently about what's happening on a national level, a political level.
Okay, I have a few people saying Pastor James for premier. So, are when you talk about a replacement of political leadership, would you do that? Would you ever put yourself in a position to run for political leadership or political office?
I'd have to say absolutely not. I have a very clear calling. I am completely committed to that calling. There's no question that politics interests me. You know, if I do sometimes have thoughts of, you know, if I wasn't a pastor in ministry, which is a huge if because I am, you know, what would I do? And politics is one of those things that does interest me, but I am there's no temptation for me to get involved in politics on that level. I'm committed to the work that I do as a pastor.
Well, now one other thing that Erin said is that if the premier repented, she'd forgive. And what would he have to do to win your support back?
Well, let me just be honest. I mean, I don't have unforgiveness toward Premier Kenney. I mean, I love the man. I love all people. I don't have unforgiveness toward the RCMP, Dina Hinshaw. So I'm not harboring unforgiveness as it relates to Premier Kenney winning my affections politically to be able to warrant me voting for him again. He would just have to come clean on what he's done. Now, I'm not anticipating he's going to do that. I think, you know, the cost of him doing that at this point in time is massive. You know what, like, I don't know how he sleeps at night. I don't know how Dina Hinshaw sleeps at night. The corner that they've painted themselves into at this point in time, the only thing they can do is keep the narrative going. To come out and say, like, oops, you know what, we messed up. That how could they do that? I mean, now for me, I could go, yeah, you messed up, and you know, we forgive you and thank you for coming clean on that. But I'm not most people, so you know, if they came clean at that level, it would have a hugely negative impact. I mean, we're talking about, the stakes are so high. Livelihoods. People are committing suicide. People are dying of drug overdoses and addictions. Like, this is massive. You know, it's deeply concerning. And so I'll just at that point in time sympathize with the responsibility that Premier Kenney has. He has a massive responsibility. And so, yeah, I mean, he'd have to be the man we thought he was. And I think if he was that man, we'd know it by now. And because he's not that man, I don't think I could vote for him.
It's so frustrating because we're looking at the United States, and as you pointed out, we're very heavily influenced by American politics. But I've been watching the reopening map that the New York Times does, and there are now 15 jurisdictions in the U.S. where businesses are all open or mostly open, no mask mandates. And it sort of perplexes me why we have this barrier here. We don't even have one jurisdiction in Canada that's prepared to go that route, where they are looking at the science, bringing forward alternative evidence. And we're seeing that even in those jurisdictions where they've released restrictions or barely had any, the virus follows the same path as it does anywhere else. It just strikes me as strange that we haven't seen even one premier break ranks from this kind of top-down authoritarian type of approach. And I wonder what you think it's going to take. Maybe it's not going to be Premier Kenney. I always thought it would be Premier Kenney first because, as you mentioned, we're kind of the Texas of the North. Maybe it's Scott Moe. Maybe it's Blaine Higgs. Maybe it's somebody else. Is there some other effort that those of us who want to see a breakthrough that we should be focusing our efforts on? If you were to give some advice about what we should be doing, I think people would value that.
Yeah, I mean, all I can encourage folks to do is to return to life as normal. You know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and so it's difficult to kind of venture into, you know, prognosticating on what's happening in our country and globally and everything else. But I think it's evident that our prime minister has a more communistic leaning, and so I think he wants to fundamentally alter the way that our country is currently structured. And so I think somehow there's a top-down effort to have everyone walk in lockstep. Just think if Premier Kenney was the one province that wasn't locking down, and just think if in not locking down, his numbers were on a par or better than the rest of the country. That would make it very difficult to keep the narrative going across the country if Alberta is showing that the lockdowns are unnecessary. And so, you've got to get a country all kind of singing off the same song sheet. The U.S. is different. It's a republic, so each state has a certain amount of sovereignty and autonomy, and so it's more difficult to usher in the kind of government control that the Democrats in the U.S. want to usher in. So there just seems to be a push toward globalism in the world, which is fundamentally an increase in government, the size of government, and that comes with that government control. And that seems to be what's happening here in Canada. And it's sad.
I had just hoped that Alberta would be the exception. Now, here we are. We were having this stepped reopening, so it was at least a breakthrough. We got below the benchmark for 300 cases in hospital because that was supposed to be the benchmark to move to step 3. Well, now we're back above 300 hospitalizations. And I guess I'm feeling a lot of nervousness. I think I'm sensing that in the people who are emailing me, that we're just going to see another clampdown again. And so if they end up reversing course and going to greater restrictions, like, do you feel like you're going to be in the crosshairs once again of all that? I mean, it does strike me that there are a few people who are likely to get the worst of it. And you've made sort of a public stand. You're asking people to make a public stand. What do you think is going to happen in the next week or so?
Well, I think I'm already in the crosshairs on coming AHS enforcement. I think it's possible AHS is already putting together a plan to bring further enforcement against me, and I'm sure that this time here on your program is not going to help that. So I don't know what the ultimate outcome is. Obviously, the government, to be consistent as cases rise and hospitalizations rise, they have to clamp down. That's the playbook. So if they didn't, they would be being inconsistent with the way they've handled things to this point in time, and it's a shame. But the variant of concern now is what's being leveraged. We wrote in our public statement, if this pandemic is ever permitted to be over, implying that it may never be permitted to be over. That's just playing out. We wrote that back in when? December, January, and here we are looking at wave 3, and then there'll be wave 4, and then wave 5, and then there'll be another virus that comes along until, we're so crippled that they don't need a virus anymore to exercise the kind of control over us they want to exercise, and then it'll be too far gone at that point anyway. So I don't have any hope that COVID-19 is going away. I don't have any hope that this pandemic is going to end. And that's part of it. Going back to the obedience to Christ piece, to pastors, for example, how long do you comply? When is your limit? When is your threshold? What do you need? What information do you need to like, how long are you going to go for? And that was a huge question for us. Now, had we complied back in June, think about how long we'd be complying for, and just a little bit longer, and just a little bit longer, and it's just Christmas. Next year will be fine. I mean, I just have no hope that this is ever going to end. I don't think the vaccine is going to be the silver bullet. They've already given mixed messaging. Premier Kenney says when the vaccine comes, we'll have freedom. I think the Chief Medical Officer of Canada has said that even once the vaccine comes, we'll still have to be committed to the real defense against the virus, social distancing, masks, et cetera. So I think they want to do away with mass gatherings. I wonder how they're going to navigate that with professional sports. I mean, that's unlivable. There's no way they're going to be able to keep the NHL and the NBA from having all of their fans. So how are they going to navigate that? How are they going to have a full stadium at a Blue Jay game and then not allow churches to gather? It's going to be very interesting how they do that. Yeah, I just have no hope this thing's ever going to come to an end.
So let's talk about what this weekend looks like, because I couldn't believe it. They canceled Christmas, and then of course they canceled spring break, and now it's Easter celebration coming up this weekend. So I'm anticipating that part of the reason they didn't move to another staged opening was because that's when you're allowed to see your family. So they want to cancel all of our Easter dinners. Does that change anything for you? What's going to happen at the church this weekend for you?
Well, like we're going to have to, so Sunday we're not willing to compromise on. And so we're going to be open on Sunday. We have to wrestle with Good Friday. At this point in time, we're planning to meet. But Good Friday is not a day that it's not a hill that we're necessarily willing to die on. So we're going to have to discuss as a leadership whether we're gonna open up on Friday as planned. But like Sundays are non-negotiable for us, and nothing has changed. The variant does not change anything. So nothing changes for us. Clamping down doesn't change anything for us. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Well, it does. I think I'm sort of more putting it out there for our audience to kind of ask themselves, what is it we're all gonna do if we don't end up with more freedom? When you talk about going back to live your life normally, like as I mentioned, I'm still not doing mass gatherings. I've been asked to go to speak at a bunch of events. I'm not. We do have our restaurant open for now, unless they close it down again. I do have 10 dear friends in my cohort that I've decided to just start seeing. I feel like my life is pretty normal right now. Is that kind of what you're asking people to consider doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to put myself in everyone's shoes. I mean, like for us, for example, as a local church, the one thing that we do that would be different from the person that doesn't attend church is that we meet on Sundays. That's the one thing that we need to do, and that's where, for someone that doesn't trust Christ, doesn't know Christ, isn't saved, when it comes to complying with the health orders, they don't have any command or compulsion to do anything that would violate those health orders, so they can comply rather easily. For us as a church, we can't do that because we serve the Lord Jesus Christ. So it's hard for me to put myself in other people's shoes to know what they need to be doing or could be doing or should be doing responsibly to exercise their civil liberties. I mean, I just don't want people to be afraid. And so it's hard. It's hard for me to. I can't make that call for every person. They've got to make that call on their own.
Let's talk about what happened last week, because I know Dave Naylor was and Western Standard wrote what happened. I just wondered, after you being released, whether they'd give you a break on your first week out. And it doesn't sound like they did. I mean, I know that there's a fitness, I mentioned this on one of the shows last week. There's a gym where essentially AHS and law enforcement is there every single day monitoring how heavy people breathe and writing her tickets preemptively for her saying, sorry, you're not allowed into my establishment. So I think that she's getting tickets because she's not allowing an inspector to inspect her place. And so there are a few people they've made an example of. What happened on Sunday? Did they leave you alone, or were they there? Were they there prepared to do the enforcement again?
Yeah, I mean, they did come, although I didn't have any word really of it until right before the service. So right before the service, I was told that the RCMP wanted to come in, and so you can understand how difficult that would be for me. I was in jail for 5 weeks. They didn't come into our facility. As I understand it, they stayed off our property for those 5 weeks. Then the first Sunday I'm back, I find out literally the moment before I'm going to speak to my congregation in the welcome that the RCMP wants to come in. Now, that's difficult. I mean, number one, it's a challenge no matter how you dice it. I mean, when the RCMP comes in, as much as I love the RCMP and respect the RCMP and respect law enforcement and what they do, and we gave them standing ovations, it is a little unnerving to have the RCMP in your service. Now, that gets elevated when you've just come out of jail and it's elevated even more when they're doing something different than they've done previously. So when the RCMP and AHS aren't coming in for 5 weeks in a row, and then they all of a sudden decide they're coming in, well, what does that signal to me? I mean, I had to sit through the service on Sunday wondering if I was going to be arrested again, literally. And so, you know, our guys were able to keep them out, and so we were able to have that welcome together as a congregation, without the presence of the RCMP and AHS. But yeah, it's to the point now where it is disruptive. It affects my ability to carry out my God-given responsibility. And so while my respect for the RCMP hasn't changed, I am growing weary of this ongoing battle. And I think about it too, like it's in the court system, you know, like this thing's in the court system where there's a dispute that's at play at this time. Let's let the dispute play itself out. Let's let this go. You know, the AHS obviously believes that it has the authority to do what it's doing. We're challenging that, and we're subject to Christ and his authority, and he will ultimately judge every individual in AHS. And so I just think it's time to recognize that we're at an impasse. We need to obey Christ, and it's in the court system. So let's let the courts resolve this and allow us to gather without being hounded by them and harassed by them every single Sunday.
Truly, because they could continue harassing you now, I guess, for 5 or 6 weeks before the court date. Let's talk about what you hope comes out of that court proceeding in May. I mean, what if they don't take your side? What's the impact of that?
Yeah, I think it'd be difficult. I don't know that I should comment on that at this point in time. Obviously, I don't want to do anything that would compromise the integrity of that challenge. And as far as the outcome is concerned, we would certainly want the courts to recognize that the health orders are infringing on our civil liberties to such an extent that it's over the top. It's disproportionate to the actual severity of the virus. That it's not even the most effective way to go about trying to mitigate the spread of the virus. I mean, even the health orders themselves, they're not really health orders. They're behavior orders. And so I obviously we'd like the courts to support the fact that that what's happening right now is an unjustified infringement on our charter rights.
Is there another charge that's come against the church itself? Is that an entirely separate action? I'm not even sure I know what that means. We received a court summons a few weeks ago, and that's to the church as an entity. It's not directed at an individual, and so that's, I don't know how that's going to get worked out, if it gets added to sort of my court hearing, or if it's a separate court hearing. That's kind of in the hands of my lawyers. Okay. Well, we'll continue to watch that play out. What kind of feedback have you gotten from people? What sort of, I mean, I started by saying there's been the negative comments, because there's always trolls who will find some reason to say nasty things, but has the feedback been on balance more positive than negative?
Well, so there's been lots of positive feedback, and let me say that where we stand as a local church, we do have a community that is Canada wide and into the US, and all of the men that I could have ever asked to stand with us and support us. My seminary, for example, the gentleman that pastored me during my seminary time, John MacArthur, men here in Canada. So there's been immense support from all of the individuals that I would want support from. So we are not an anomaly. We have lots of churches here in Canada, the US, around the world that are supportive of us. And just to give you just an indication, I was receiving mail at the remand, and this is just a portion of it. I mean, this is just a fraction of it, but this was, here's all the mail, or at least some of the mail that I've received from the remand. There's been hundreds of emails sent to our office account. There's mail that I still haven't even gone through. The support, we've had support from Germany. We had someone from Germany write us and are appalled that this is happening. And so just think about that for a moment. That's from Germany, Netherlands. We've had contact from Iran, Africa, all over the world. And so the support is overwhelming. Unbelievable.
That's the thing that's so shocking to me, is that I think of Jason Kenney as being our most liberty-loving premier, and yet we've had some of the worst examples of police over-enforcement. I think of the young guy, Ocean Weisblatt, who was threatened with tasering when he was out playing ice hockey at an outdoor rink, and what's happened to you. I don't even know if there's another pastor in the world who's been imprisoned. Have you heard of anybody else who's experienced what you've experienced?
Not over COVID-19. No, I mean, pastors have been in prison for sure. And so that's not the first by any stretch, even within the context of our generation worldwide. But I don't know of anyone that's been jailed for, health orders and COVID-19.
Wild. Okay, let's talk just in the last few minutes that we've got here about the impact on your family. So I could not believe how stoic and lovely and forgiving Erin was when I spoke with her. Just sort of a picture of calm. Maybe she's a little bit different when the camera's not on and you get to see just how rattled she might be. But how's it been for her? When I spoke with her, it was still really quite early on. 5 weeks is a long time to be without you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was tough on her. I think us being apart was difficult for her. She was without her head, without her leader, and so I think just the pressure of the time, the volatility of the time, the chaos of the time, all of the media stuff that she did was incredibly busy. So she was exhausted, but she was fighting for me. She was going to bat for me. And so I think it's been hard for her. At the same time, we didn't ask for this, obviously, but we're here as slaves of Christ. Jesus says, if any man wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. And so we have been born from above. We have turned away from our sin and looked to Christ for forgiveness. We have trusted in his death and resurrection on the cross as a sufficient and only sufficient final payment for our sin. We have the hope of heaven before us. We know that even if we die in this life, and we anticipate that we will die unless the Lord should return first, that we have everlasting life and will live in the new heavens and new earth. So we're here to serve the Lord, and so he laid down his life for us. He took the wrath of God on the cross for our sins, and so for us to go through some momentary light affliction is just a joy, and yes, difficult, but he is worthy and faithful and glorious and good and just, and so we happily do that.
Let's talk about the impact on your kids, because you mentioned that you didn't become devout until 23. Your kids are a little bit younger than that. How are they dealing with everything you've gone through?
Yeah, I think they're doing well. I mean, our oldest has he's trusted Christ, so he knows the Lord, and he's following after him. So he's it was hard for him initially, but I think they understand what's happening right now, and they understand this comes with following Christ, and and that sometimes you have to suffer in following him. And so he understands that. My youngest is obviously processing things a little bit more differently and doesn't quite have the understanding that the oldest does, but Lord willing, his understanding will increase, and I think he's just happy to have his dad back, and hopefully it stays that way. So we'll have to play that by ear, I guess.
So is he okay? Because I think Aaron mentioned that the kids at school were saying rotten things to him. I think one had just said your dad's actions are going to kill people or something along those lines. I don't know how much more negativity the kids have been subjected to. You know, kids parrot the things that they hear their parents say. And so that's why I'm wondering, it sounds like you've got a very supportive family life, very supportive church community, but you can't protect everyone from all the outside influences. Have either of your kids faced any more of that?
You know, I think it's possible the oldest did get a little bit of pushback from some of his classmates, but has for the most part received a lot of support. And I think won a teacher over in the whole thing too.
Really?
And then as far as my youngest goes, it was just one interaction with just one of his close friends, and I think that got worked out. So they're hanging out again and enjoying each other's company. And so I think you know, it's good for him to be able to experience stuff like that. That's part of life, and so we don't try and shelter our boys from that. We just want to help shepherd them through it. But I think that's the only real negative interaction he received, and I think that got resolved.
Good. So tell us, if you had a prediction about how this all plays out, what do you think happens from here? I keep going back and forth between feeling like I was feeling really hopeful, actually. When I decided to leave media, I was thinking, okay, well, there'll be a couple more months. The weather will turn. We'll be back to the way things were last summer. Life will be near normal. And then everyone who wants to have a vaccination will have one, and we'll have enough people who have been vaccinated that by September, surely we're back in the same, not new normal. New normal would be the old normal. That was what I had hoped. But then all of the hysteria and strange reporting around variants. I think one of the docs I had on last week said we nearly have 4,000 variants. Variants are sort of a natural thing that happens to viruses. It's why we have change in influenza shots every year. But if they're going to take this strange reaction to every variant that crops up, it makes me really nervous that we aren't going to get back to normal. So give me your best prediction about how this plays out.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I think with the summer months coming, you would expect that there'd be a lightening of restrictions to some point. I don't think we're going to get to full-blown normal in the summertime. So I think there'll still be restrictions on churches and that kind of thing. I think that, I mean, my understanding is, and I'm not totally dialed in on this, that there were protests in Ontario, Quebec. Obviously, there have been protests here in Alberta. So I think like good, healthy civil unrest on that level, where there's just an appropriate protest happening, a peaceful protest, is helpful in putting pressure on the government to demonstrate that the people are not buying the narrative, and it's time to go back to normal. So I don't know. For me, like, I just try and survive the week that I'm in. I don't know what is going to happen with me. I seem to be a marked enemy. And when I say that, I'm not talking in the spiritual sense, although that's true too. I think that the government and AHS see me as like public enemy number one. And I don't know if that's true, but it's the way that it feels at times. And so when it comes, I'm just trying to get through the week that I'm in and the day that I'm in, let alone, anticipate being on a golf course in the summer, which would be phenomenal, by the way.
Well, I'm sure you'll be able to do that, because golf courses were one of the first things to open up last year. At least outdoor activities are freeing up a bit. But it makes me weary to think that every time we get into respiratory virus season in October, it's going to be open up, shut down, and it's going to last until end of spring break. And we're going to have restrictions on our ability to travel. I mean, in the UK, they've made it illegal now to travel for holiday purposes on pain of a $5,000 fine. And so I guess I'm just wondering what happens if we have to weather this through for years. I don't know if we have any precedent on this. Is there, what are you looking to as a way of giving you strength if this turns out to be a long-term battle?
Well, it's unprecedented to your point. I mean, never have we quarantined the healthy to mitigate the spread of a virus. I mean, these steps are so bizarre. And out of step, by the way, with the Old Testament scriptures. The Old Testament scriptures have instruction on how to deal with these kinds of issues, and it's not quarantine the healthy; it's quarantine the sick. So, I don't know.
Why don't I ask one more thing? Because I talk to people who are involved in the kind of events that haven't been allowed to open because of mass gatherings. And there's almost a sort of an acceptance that, oh, well, I guess we'll have to have vaccine passports and you're not going to be allowed to have concerts again or sporting events again until you flash a barcode that shows that you have had your vaccination. I wonder how serious a proposal that is, and what would that mean if they came up with a rule like that on mass congregations, that the only way they're allowed is if you have some proof of vaccination?
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to cross that bridge when we get there. I mean, obviously, if there was, it's just difficult. I mean, people have their own opinions about vaccines. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you do at that point in time. It seems to me that that's too much government involvement for the government to be telling you need a vaccine to go here, there, and everywhere. That's like a level of micromanagement in my life that I think is unhealthy. I think the vaccines need to be safe. This point maybe needs to be raised. When Dina Hinshaw talks about the current vaccines being authorized, it's important to know they haven't been approved. They've been emergency authorized. They haven't been sufficiently tested to be approved. And so, like, I don't have a ton of confidence in the vaccines. I mean,
and you're not alone on that. I mean, we were told a week ago that AstraZeneca was perfectly safe for all ages, and now we've got this provincial committee saying if you're under age 55, don't take it. So there is mixed messaging there too. Well, it's so complicated.
Yeah, and here's the thing: like when I think about it, I think, like, wouldn't it just be better to get the virus itself? I mean, if 99% of the people that get the virus are gonna fully recover, like, why get the vaccine? Like, why not just get the virus? And I'm not saying like have a COVID party or something stupid like that. I'm just saying, I'm quite happy to let my immune system fight off what it can and let it rely on its own internal God-given ability to do that, than rely on the artificial approach of a vaccine for a sickness that's not severe enough to warrant that. I mean, I'm not a flu shot guy. If people are flu shot people and they do that, that's fine. But I don't take a flu shot to mitigate the flu. So I just don't understand, why, and that just proves it. Like, people are so excited they're getting their vaccine and now they have freedom. And I think, man, like, you really have to be buying the mainstream media narrative to be so happy about a vaccine that's going to protect you from a virus that you could be asymptomatic on anyway, and not even know you had the virus. You might already be immune. You may have already had the virus and didn't even know it, and now you're putting a vaccine in your body. And I pray to God that it would not harm anyone. So,
I was initially persuaded by the idea of allowing us our freedoms back with the increase in vaccination of the population. But what I'm hearing you say is, freedom for freedom's sake. Like there's good enough reasons to take our freedom back and to want our freedom back without it being contingent.
Well, and you said that was libertarian. I mean, I'm not even sure if I understand what it means to be libertarian. I just I think the government's too involved in my life. And I don't know if that's libertarian or just biblical. I mean, I want to be able to exercise my God-given rights and freedoms so that I can promote human flourishing and be a blessing to my community. And right now, the government's involvement in my life is and in the lives of all Albertans is precluding that. So I don't know. I don't claim to be a libertarian or anything like that. I probably need to study it more to understand what it means. But
well, I love the way you just naturally talk about freedom. I appreciate that. It's so rare these days. You have been so generous with your time tonight. I really appreciate it. I think I'll probably invite Dave Naylor back to join us and to sign off. But this has been a conversation with Pastor James Coates. I don't think that we have heard the last of him. Thank you so much for being generous with your time tonight, Pastor James.
Thank you for having me.
So that was Pastor James Coates. That was the first interview, I don't know, maybe of many that are coming up. I know that his wife Erin was on Tucker Carlson. Also, they did a piece on it with Glenn Beck, and I have featured Glenn on this radio broadcast many times. Definitely follow a lot of what he says, and I think he's spot on what's coming. Both Glenn Beck, but also James. That James knows a lot of what's going on in the world. Like I said, I got to know him very well. We joke about this all the time, but my wife says you guys talked more about conspiracies than you did, marriage counseling when we were marriage counseling. And we used to talk quite a bit before we would get into the marriage counseling, but we would talk about, like he said, economics. We would get into the financial world, how the central banks are run. So he's definitely very familiar, wise when it comes to just seeing the way this world is operating. And quite honestly, he's very pessimistic on the things that are to come. It's actually alarming that he is so pessimistic on what, in his research and what he's looked at. But he has in his sermon, and you can check out, their church at gracelife.ca is the church website, but also on the sermons on YouTube, Grace Life Church, I think of Edmonton. If you type that in, you'll see it. But you'll see the kind of the sermons they were talking about. But the one that he talks about in December 14th, I believe that was the sermon. If you go back on YouTube on the playlist here on the Celebrate Truth radio shows, you'll see I've done multiple shows. If you go back, I've featured his sermons multiple times. The two in particular, one that, he was railing about everything that was going on. Then also the one that he basically called the government to repentance. It was a pretty strong sermon, and a couple of days later, he found himself in jail. So that obviously was something that was very, very strong. But getting back to the original sermon, he talks about taking clips, obviously, and watching our premier, Trudeau, talking about the Great Reset, talking about how this has given a great opportunity to transform Canada, and all these different words. And Justin Trudeau has talked quite positively about the Great Reset and about this is a great opportunity, this coronavirus. So if you kind of look at it based on that, if they are trying to continually get everything in line for the Great Reset, then I think there's some truth to it that this probably is not going to end. This is going to continue on with lockdowns, and then they'll lessen the restrictions, and then the lockdowns. And then, so it just seems like they're just trying to wear us out. And that is not what needs to happen. We need to stand strong. This is where we need to speak out. This is where we need to get the word out. Please keep Pastor James in prayer. Keep his family in prayer. Aaron, his boys, they're going to be coming under incredible attack. If they're not already, it's coming in spades leading up to the trial in May. But he has become public enemy number one, not just here in Alberta, but also across Canada. I would say that there's a lot of eyes on him. He is becoming the most outspoken on this. And to date, there has never been a pastor that has gone to jail over resisting any health orders to anything to do with coronavirus. You're looking at history in the making, Pastor James Coates, and it just blows my mind because, like I said, this is my former pastor. I got to know James so well, and it's like already, I believe that he is about to become very, very large, and James is not for that at all. That's not what his motivations are, and if anything, we'll see what happens. But I don't see him being on a tremendous amount of interviews, but the ones that the Lord calls him to do, he will do. And it will be just interesting to see what happens. But I don't think this is the last. That, James could even end up in jail again. There could be enforcement coming even before his trial in May. But please keep him in prayer. Like I said, there's people praying all over the world for him, but he is standing strong. I think in the last 2 hours, if you've gone over this interview, I think he's an incredibly godly man. He's all about the gospel. He truly is standing strong to his convictions. And there's not many people like that these days. So whether you're Christian or not, it's not even relevant when it comes to this. It comes to the fact that so many people are now supporting the fact of what he's speaking. He's speaking truth, and he's talking about standing up for our rights. It's way overboard what's been going on. If you kind of look at the overreach, and James is not saying, he's not discounting and saying that there's not, some sort of virus out there. He's saying there is truth. There's legitimacy to it. But he's saying, let's look at the data. Let's look at the science. Guys, it's always been, for Celebrate Truth, from 2015 right now to present, April 3rd, 2021, the same thing. Scientism versus science, right? This is what we're seeing. And this is all that's been taking place in our society is scientism. So scientists, again, right? The guys in the white lab coats, the vaccines, right? Trust the science, they say, but they're not showing any real science. When you start looking at the data, when you start asking for the empirical evidence, you see nothing. It's the same thing that we have been talking about for years on this channel. Everything I've done with Scientism Exposed, Scientism Exposed 2. Heck, if I was going to do Scientism Exposed 3, I would be moving it right into today. And again, nothing but scientism. It's always been about scientism. Satan has used the illusion of science as being this Trojan horse. It's not a belief, it's the truth, right? You can't argue with science. That's why they're saying, trust the science. The science is settled. There is no debate. But there is a very, very strong debate when you get into real science. Say no to scientism, say no to tyranny, say no to all this overreach of government when they're not backing it by facts, they're not backing it by truth, and they're definitely not backing it by science. Again, like I said, if you haven't seen my documentary, Scientism Exposed, you're in for a wild ride. I suggest you do it. You can check it out at celebratetruth.org. That's celebratetruth.org. Right now I have a special for anything that you buy. You get an extra DVD for free. Check it out. But if you don't even want to buy something, watch it for free on YouTube. All my documentaries are for free. So, hey, watch it. But if you want to get this out, get this in the hands. It's a great discussion because when you find out the lies of scientism, it is just unbelievable. It's right across the board. And we're seeing this now in 2020 and 2021, where scientism has gone to a point of tyrannical authoritarianism. I mean, it is out of control, literally ordering you in your homes. They're ordering you not to work. They're ordering you all these things. And again, AHS is what James was talking about, Alberta Health Services. And again, whatever country you're in, of course, it's these health guys. But guess what? It goes back to what? The science, the scientists. Guys, these guys are nothing but liars. They're not showing you real data. They're not showing you any empirical evidence whatsoever. There is no experiments that have been conducted whatsoever. And the experiments that have, they're hiding from the public. Just like when it comes to the vaccines, like Pastor James Coates said, remember, this is like authorized, but it hasn't been approved. So it's been authorized under an emergency, get it out, rush it out to the public, but it has not even been approved, meaning it hasn't even been approved for distribution as far as its safety. And yet people are just going to line up. This is the time to stand strong. It's an overreach. There's many people out there just like you that are saying the same thing. So honestly, stand strong, continue to pray. There is a spiritual war going on. Something big is going on in the world. We're seeing this continual. You're going to hear it over and over and over on this channel, Celebrate Truth. So don't miss another episode. I'll be back next week. Same time, same place. Celebrate Truth Radio. This is episode 103. This was a special broadcast. I wanted to make sure that we featured Pastor James Coates because I've been doing a lot of episodes around the surroundings of just getting him thrown into jail in the first place. But now that he's out, he's speaking, he's standing strong. And I think the fight has just begun. That's what Aaron seems to say. That's what seems to be going on. And trust me, knowing them very well, I can tell you that they know that the fight is not over. It has just started. So please pray for them, pray for their family, pray for the church, because a lot of stuff is coming their way. Really appreciate everyone for tuning in tonight. Blessings all. Have a great evening.